I have spent a considerable amount of time, in the years since, trying to identify the exact moment I made the decision that ruined me. Not ruined in the way that ends things. Ruined in the way that cracks something open so completely that it can never be fully reassembled, can only be rebuilt into something different, something that carries the shape of the break in its structure forever. Ruined the way storms ruin landscapes. Destructively. Permanently. And sometimes, if you are patient enough to wait for what grows in the aftermath, beautifully. My name is Jasper Quinn and I am, by every available measure, someone who should have known better. I was 23 years old and I was working as a junior event coordinator for a hospitality company that handled corporate functions for people who had more money than they knew what to do with, which meant I spent a significant portion of my professional life standing in elegant rooms making sure rich people had enough canapes and did not notice the seams of the operation that kept everything running. I was good at it. I was the kind of good at it that involves being simultaneously invisible and essential, which is a very specific skill set and one that I had developed, I realize now, because it mirrored exactly the way I moved through the rest of my life. Invisible. Essential to everyone. Noticed by nobody in particular. Until Rhett Calloway. The event was a quarterly corporate dinner, the kind with a guest list that read like a directory of people who owned significant portions of things. Black tie. Flowers that cost more than my monthly rent. A menu curated by a chef whose name was sufficient on its own to justify the price of the table. I was checking placements when he walked in. He arrived slightly late, which I noted professionally because late arrivals disrupted seating and required adjustment, and which I noted personally because the door opened and something in the room changed. The specific atmospheric shift that happens when a person with a very particular kind of presence enters a space and the space quietly reorganizes itself around them. Rhett Calloway was 30 years old and he was, I have tried many times since, to describe what Rhett Calloway looked like to someone who had not seen him, and I have consistently failed, because the description always sounds like an inventory of features rather than an account of the experience of him. Dark hair. Strong jaw. Gray-green eyes that moved across a room like they were running a calculation. Broad, in the way that suggested not effort but inheritance. The body of someone whose ancestors had been built for something physical and demanding and had passed it down through generations like a legacy. He was in a black tuxedo and he wore it the way very confident men wear formal clothes, like it was simply his natural state and anything less would have been a step down. He looked across the room. He looked at me. And this is the part one have examined most often in the years since, with the forensic attention of someone trying to understand how an accident occurred. He did not look away immediately. He held it, 1 second, 2, the length of time that separates a glance from a look, and something moved through those gray-green eyes that I was 23 and inexperienced enough to misread completely. I looked away first. Because I was working. Because he was a guest. Because I was invisible and essential and that was the function I served in rooms like this. He found me at the end of the evening. I was supervising breakdown, the quiet, efficient dismantling of the beautiful room back into its component parts, and he appeared beside me with the casual certainty of someone who had decided something and was now executing it. "You've been running this entire event," he said. "Not a question." "Part of it," I said carefully. "You fixed the seating issue in the third row without anyone noticing," he said. "And you handled the dietary situation at table 7 with the kind of discretion that prevented what would have been a significant scene." I looked at him. He had been watching. Specifically. Not the event. I was doing my job. "You were doing it exceptionally," he said. And then, "Have a drink with me." I should have said no. I want to be very clear about this. The part of me that had functioning self-preservation instincts said no immediately and without ambiguity. He was a guest. I was staff. He was Rhett Calloway, whose name appeared on buildings I walked past on my commute. I was Jasper Quinn, who ate lunch at my desk and took the last bus home. "I'm still working," I said. "Your team has the rest," he said, with the infuriating accuracy of someone who had assessed the situation thoroughly. "Mr. Calloway." "Rhett," he said. And the way he said his own name, like he was giving me something by allowing me to use it, should have told me everything. Should have told me that this was a man who was accustomed to deciding things and having them happen. I had one drink with him. One drink became 3 hours, became the specific warm blur of talking to someone who listens with his whole attention, who asks questions and remembers the answers, who looks at you like you are the most interesting problem he has decided to solve tonight. I know what it was. I know it now, completely and clearly. It was practiced. It was the particular skill of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how the architecture of it worked. The attention, the questions, the listening, the slow warmth of being seen by someone extraordinary. I know all of that. I also know that at 23, 3 drinks into being looked at like I mattered by Rhett Calloway, I did not know any of it at all. He kissed me in the elevator of the hotel. I let him. He took me to his suite and I went, and he was not careless with me that night. That is the thing I have turned over most often, the detail that made the morning hardest to understand. He was not careless. He was thorough and warm, and he said my name like he meant it and held me like I was something he had been looking for. I woke up at 7 in the morning. He was already awake. Sitting in the chair by the window, fully dressed, looking at his phone with the focused expression of a man whose morning had already started and whose previous evening had been filed and processed and moved on from. He looked up when I stirred. "Good morning," he said. Polite, even, perfectly pleasant and perfectly, devastatingly empty of anything that had been in his voice the night before. "Rhett," I said. "There's coffee," he said. "And I've arranged a car." A car. Arranged. Like I was a logistical consideration. Like I was a detail of the evening that required tidy resolution before the day could begin. I sat up. I looked at him across the hotel room in the gray morning light and I saw, with the specific horrible clarity that arrives when something you have been choosing not to see becomes impossible to avoid, what the night had actually been. Not the beginning of something. The entirety of something. Complete. Filed. Finished. "Thank you for the car," I said, and my voice was extraordinary in its steadiness, and I found my clothes and my bag and I did not look at him again. He said something as I reached the door. Something that might have been my name. I did not stop to find out. I took the arranged car. I rode home in the gray morning through the city that had no idea what had just happened to me, and I looked out the window the whole way and did not let myself feel anything until I was inside my own apartment with the door closed behind me. Then I sat on my kitchen floor and felt all of it. And I told myself, with the fierce conviction of someone trying to build a wall fast enough to matter, that it was one night. That I was fine. That Rhett Calloway would recede into the category of things that happened and were over, and I would be exactly who I had been before the hotel elevator, and none of this would leave a mark. I was wrong about all of it. I was wrong in ways that would not make themselves completely clear for another 4 weeks. And then one more. And then I would sit on a different floor, my bathroom this time, and understand that Rhett Calloway had left something behind that neither of us had planned for. And everything I had told myself on my kitchen floor would have to be rebuilt from the beginning. 4 weeks and 6 days after the hotel. The test. A floor. A truth that changed the shape of everything that came after. And the first time I understood what it meant to be truly, completely, irrevocably not fine. The test was positive on a Wednesday. I took 3 more on Thursday, which was either thoroughness or denial depending on how generously you interpret the behavior of a 23-year-old sitting on bathroom tile at 6 in the morning surrounded by evidence that the universe had made a decision without consulting him. All 3 said the same thing. I sat there for a long time. Ren found me. She had her own key. My younger sister had always had her own key, on the basis that Jasper Quinn was the kind of person who needed someone to be able to get to him, which had always slightly irritated me and now seemed like the most profound gift anyone had ever given me. She came in for the coffee I had forgotten to make. She found me on the bathroom floor. She looked at the tests lined up on the edge of the bathtub like a verdict delivered in triplicate. She sat down on the floor beside me without saying anything. We sat there together for a while. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm keeping it," I said. She nodded. "I know." "I know you know," I said. "Are you going to tell him?" she said. And here is the thing about that question. The thing that I have turned over and over in the years since, the thing I have examined from every available angle looking for the version of the answer that is cleanly right or cleanly wrong. There was no clean answer. There was only what I knew, which was this. I knew what Rhett Calloway's face looked like at 7 in the morning when the previous night had been filed and processed and finished. I knew what his voice sounded like when it was empty of everything it had contained the night before. I knew what it felt like to be an arranged car, a logistical consideration requiring tidy resolution. And I knew, with the fierce protective certainty of something that had activated in me the moment those 3 tests aligned, that I was not handing my child to a man who might look at them the same way. No, I said. Ren was quiet. Ren, I said. I didn't say anything, she said. You're thinking very loudly. I'm thinking, she said carefully, that he has a right to... He has a right to nothing, I said, and my voice was very quiet and very certain. He arranged a car, Ren. He looked at me like I was a detail that needed managing. I looked at my hands. I'm not giving him the opportunity to look at my child the same way. She was quiet for a long time. Okay, she said finally. Then we do this ourselves. We do this ourselves, I agreed. What followed was the hardest and most extraordinary year of my life. My body did things I had not given it permission to do, exhaustion that sat in my bones, changes that happened whether I was ready for them or not, a physical reality that restructured everything around it. I rearranged my work schedule and negotiated with my employer with the specific dignity of someone who was not going to be managed by anyone's discomfort with his situation. And there were nights. The specific 4 a.m. variety, when the apartment was dark and quiet and the weight of what I was doing alone pressed down on me with an intimacy that daylight never quite allowed. Nights when I lay awake and thought about Rhett Calloway in his hotel chair, already dressed, already finished, already on to the next thing. And then other nights. Nights when I felt the first movement, small and unmistakable and entirely real, and the weight lifted and was replaced by something so enormous and uncomplicated and complete that everything else became temporarily irrelevant. Oliver was born on a Sunday morning in October. He was small and furious and perfect in the way that only entirely new things are perfect, not polished but real, not finished but complete, requiring nothing to justify his existence. He had my mouth, my nose, my dark hair. He had gray-green eyes. I looked at those gray-green eyes in the delivery room with Ren on one side of me gripping my hand hard enough to leave marks, and I felt the full complicated weight of what those eyes meant, and I made a decision, quiet and complete and absolute, about what kind of life I was going to build around this small, furious Sunday morning person. Hi, I said to him, very quietly. I'm your dad. It's going to be us for a while. I held him against my chest and felt his heartbeat against mine and said the thing I needed to say out loud so that the universe could hear it and hold me to it. But I promise you, I absolutely promise, that us is going to be more than enough. Oliver looked at me with those gray-green eyes. And I believed it. For 4 years I believed it so completely that it stopped being a promise and became simply the truth of our lives. Small and warm and loud with his laughter, full of his questions and his drawings on my refrigerator and the specific chaos of existing in a space occupied by a small person with very strong opinions about everything. He was extraordinary. Not because he was mine, though he was mine completely and in every way, but because he was himself. Specifically, entirely, wonderfully himself. Oliver who asked why about everything. Oliver who was kind to smaller things. Oliver who said sorry like he meant it and meant it like it cost him something. He was 4 years old when he asked me the question that I was not prepared for. We were at bedtime. The specific sacred quiet of it, lamp on, book closed, the city doing its nighttime things outside his window. Daddy, he said. Where is my other dad? I had been waiting for this question for 4 years with the specific dread of someone who knows a thing is coming and cannot figure out how to be ready for it. You have me, I said carefully. I know, he said, with the patient tone of someone clarifying rather than arguing. But Finn at school has 2 dads. And Rosie has a mom and a dad. And I just have you. He looked at me with those gray-green eyes. Is there another dad? I looked at my son. Yes, I said, because I had decided years ago that I would not lie to him. There is. Oliver absorbed this. Does he know about me? No, I said. Another absorption. Why? And here was the question I had no clean answer for. Here was the question that required me to explain adult failures to a 4-year-old in language that was honest without being cruel, accurate without being damaging. Because, I said carefully, sometimes grown-ups make choices that are complicated. And I made a choice to take care of you myself. Oliver thought about this for a long time. Daddy, he said finally, very quietly, do you think he would love me? The room was very still. I looked at my son, at those gray-green eyes in his small serious face, at the question in them that was so simple and so enormous simultaneously, and I felt the specific pain of a question I could not answer honestly without either lying to him or telling him something I did not know was true. I think, I said finally very carefully, that you are someone it would be very difficult not to love. Oliver considered this. That's not really an answer, he said. He was 4 years old and he was completely right. No, I said. It isn't. He looked at me for a moment. Then he tucked himself under his blanket with the decisive energy of someone who had processed a significant amount and needed sleep. Okay, he said. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Bug, I said. I turned off the lamp. I sat in the dark outside his door for a long time. And I thought about a question I had not answered honestly, and whether the man it was about deserved the opportunity to make the answer something better than I knew it to be. I did not reach a conclusion that night. The conclusion reached me instead. 3 weeks later. In a way I had not planned for. In the way that the universe always delivers the things I have not planned for. Suddenly, completely, and with absolute disregard for my readiness. 3 weeks after the question I could not answer. A parent and child art exhibition. A community center gallery. A man who was not supposed to be there. And Oliver, who saw him across the room and said, in the loud, clear voice of a 4-year-old, Daddy, that man has the same eyes as me. The community center art exhibition was Oliver's idea. This is important context. The entire catastrophe that followed was, at its origin point, the direct result of a 4-year-old's enthusiasm for a finger painting he had made of our apartment building that he described as impressionistic and that looked, with great love and honesty, like a building being consumed by a cheerful orange fire. It has to go in the show, Daddy, he had told me, with the absolute conviction of someone who had never once doubted the quality of his own work and would not be starting tonight. It's very good, Bug, I had said. It's my best one, he said. The orange is the sunset. Of course it is. Will you come? I will always come, I said, because this was simply true and had always been true and would always be true for as long as Oliver Quinn asked me to show up anywhere. So I came. The community center was warm and bright and full of the specific cheerful chaos of small people who had made art and were now very invested in other people appreciating it. Oliver had found his painting immediately and positioned himself beside it with the proprietary energy of a gallery curator who was also 4. I was getting us drinks from the refreshment table when it happened. Oliver's voice, clear and carrying, the way his voice always was in situations that called for quiet discretion, cut through the room noise with devastating precision. Daddy, that man has the same eyes as me. I turned around slowly. Rhett Calloway was standing 10 feet away from my son. He was there because, I found out later, much later, in the specific reconstruction of events that follows a collision, his company had sponsored the community center renovation and he had come for what was supposed to be a brief walkthrough of the facility with the center director and had instead walked into a children's art exhibition because the director had not confirmed which rooms would be in use. The universe. Its characteristic total indifference. Etc. He was in a dark coat, casual, and he was looking at Oliver with an expression that I watched change in real time, the polite attention of a man who has been caught in an unexpected social situation giving way to something else, something that moved through his face like whether moving through a sky, like something enormous arriving from a long way off and landing all at once. Oliver looked up at him with those gray-green eyes. His eyes, Rhett's eyes, the specific gray-green that I had looked at every single day for 4 years in my son's face, and the visual connection between them was so immediate and so obvious that I watched Rhett's expression do the rest of the calculation in real time. He looked up from Oliver. He looked across the room. He found me. And the expression on Rhett Calloway's face in that moment, I have tried to describe it since and I have always fallen short, because it was too many things simultaneously for any single description to hold. Recognition. Something that was almost physical, like a blow absorbed. And underneath all of that, moving through it like light through deep water, something raw and enormous and completely uncontrolled that I had never seen on his face in any of the time I had known him. Jasper, he said. My name. After 4 years. In his voice that I had tried very hard to forget and had not entirely succeeded at forgetting. Rhett, I said. From 10 feet away. Steadily. Because I had Oliver beside me and Oliver was watching and I was not going to fall apart in front of my son. Oliver looked between us with the attentive expression of someone tracking important information. Do you know him, Daddy? He asked. Yes, I said. From a long time ago. Rhett crossed the room. Not fast. Controlled, the way he did everything, except the control was sitting differently than I remembered, like it had been reassembled in a hurry and some of the pieces weren't quite flush. He crouched down. To Oliver's level. All the way down, this large controlled man folding himself carefully to the eye level of a 4-year-old, and he looked at my son with those gray-green eyes that were the same as my son's gray-green eyes, and I watched something happen on his face that I had no framework to process. Hi, he said to Oliver. Quietly. Carefully. Oliver assessed him with the fearless thoroughness of a child who had not yet learned that some people were worth being cautious of. Hi, Oliver said. I made that painting. He pointed at the impressionistic sunset building. The orange is the sunset. It's remarkable, Rhett said, and his voice was different, rougher at the edges, like something in it had been destabilized. I know, Oliver said with serene confidence. Rhett stood back up. He looked at me. The gallery was full of people and none of them existed. Can we? He started. No, I said quietly. Jasper. Not here, I said. Not in front of him. He looked at Oliver, who had returned his attention to his painting with the focused satisfaction of an artist reviewing his own work. Okay, Rhett said. Quiet. Careful. Then tell me when. I looked at him. At this man who had looked at me like I was an arranged car and who was now looking at me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered, and the 4 years of walls between those two moments were so enormous and so heavy that I felt the weight of them physically. Give me your number, I said. He did. Immediately. Without hesitation or condition. I texted Ren that night after Oliver was in bed. Her response was 11 words. I need you to know I have never been so angry. I know, I typed back. What are you going to do? I looked at my phone for a long time. I don't know yet, I typed. But Oliver asked me last month if his father would love him. The 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. What did you say? I said he was someone it would be difficult not to love. That's not an answer, Ren said. I know, I said. Oliver told me the same thing. The dots again. Okay, she said finally. What do you need? I need you to trust me. Please, she said. Without hesitation. The way Ren always said the things that mattered. Immediately, completely, without making me earn them. Rhett called the next morning. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. I have conditions, I said. Before he could speak. Before he could say anything that would make this harder or easier in ways I had not prepared for. Tell me, he said. Oliver comes first. In every conversation, every decision, every moment of whatever this is. Not your feelings. Not mine. Not your schedule or your company or your name. Oliver first. Always. Yes, he said. You do not tell him who you are, I said. Not until I decide, and I mean with input from people who have been here for 4 years, that it is right for him. Not convenient for you. Right for him. The pause. I understand. And Rhett. I stopped. Took a breath. Steadied myself. If you start this, you finish it. You do not get to come into his life and leave. I will not let you be something Oliver reaches for and loses. If you walk through this door, you stay at that door. You understand what I am saying. The silence that followed was very long. Yes, he said finally. And his voice had something in it that I had not heard at 7 in the morning in a hotel room. Something undone, something that had been through something in the last 24 hours and was still processing the damage. Jasper, can I ask you something? You can ask. Why didn't you tell me? Not an accusation. The genuine, painful question of a man asking something he already half knew the answer to and was bracing for the other half. Because you arranged a car, I said. Because you looked at me at 7 in the morning like I was a logistical consideration. Because I was 23 years old and I had just spent a night believing something that was not true, and I was not going to give you my child and watch you look at him the same way you looked at me. The silence on his end was the longest yet. He started. Stopped. There is no version of what I did that morning that I can justify to you. No, I agreed. There isn't. I'm sorry, he said. I sat with those two words for a moment. Turned them over. Examined what they were and what they were not. That's a beginning, I said. It is a very long way from enough. But it is a beginning. He exhaled. Okay, he said. Tell me what the next step looks like. And I told him. The next step was a park. On a Saturday. With Oliver, who brought his ball and his opinions and had no idea what he was walking into. And Rhett, who arrived early. Who was already there when we came through the gate. Who stood up when he saw us and then stood very still, like moving might break something. Oliver saw him and said, "You came." And Rhett said, "I came." And Oliver said, "Good." And ran toward the grass with his ball as if it were that simple. As if all of it were simply that simple. And maybe, for a 4-year-old with gray-green eyes and a finger-painted sunset, it was. Rhett Calloway showed up. I want to say that first, before anything else, because it is the thing I had not known to expect and the thing that mattered most in everything that followed. He showed up. Every time. Without exception, without excuse, without the kind of gradual erosion that I had braced myself for because the alternative, hoping, had seemed too expensive. The park on Saturday became parks on Saturdays. Then Saturdays that included lunch after. Then occasional weekday evenings when Rhett came by after work and sat on my kitchen floor helping Oliver build block towers with the focused dedication of a man for whom this specific activity had become, inexplicably, the most important part of his day. Oliver absorbed him with the easy openness of a child who had not yet learned to be guarded, who took the presence of a new person in his world and incorporated it with the same matter-of-fact acceptance he brought to most things. He called him Rhett for 2 months. Then one evening he called him something else, sideways, in the middle of a sentence about dinosaurs, and then continued talking about dinosaurs without pausing to acknowledge what he had said. Rhett went very still. Oliver kept talking about the dietary habits of the Brachiosaurus. I watched Rhett's face from across the kitchen and I watched the thing happen on it that I had been watching happen incrementally for months. The slow, undeniable, completely uncontrolled softening of a man who had been built by a world that punished softness and was now being systematically dismantled by a 4-year-old who thought the Brachiosaurus was probably very gentle. Ren came for dinner that Friday. She sat across from Rhett with the expression of someone conducting an assessment that she had been planning for a considerable amount of time and was executing with precision. Rhett sat across from her with the expression of someone who understood he was being assessed and had no objection to it. Oliver sat between them and ate his pasta and provided commentary on both their reactions to everything he said with the cheerful authority of someone who assumed the world's attention was his and had not yet been given reason to think otherwise. After dinner, while Oliver was in the bath, Ren stood in my kitchen beside me while I washed up and said, very quietly, "He looks at Oliver the way he should have looked at you from the beginning." "I know," I said. "That doesn't fix what he did," she said. "I know that too," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" I turned the question over, looked at it from several angles, tried to find the honest answer rather than the comfortable one. "Complicated," I said. "I feel complicated." Ren nodded. "That's fair." "He's trying," I said. "He's trying in ways that," I stopped. "Tried again." He asked Oliver what his favorite color was last Saturday and Oliver said it changed every day depending on his mood and Rhett said that was the most sensible approach to the question he had ever heard. Ren looked at me. "He said that," I said. "To a 4-year-old. And he meant it." "Jasper," Ren said carefully. "I know," I said. "Deep," she said. I looked at my hands in the soapy water. "I know he was careless with me," I said. "I know that the morning after was one of the worst mornings of my life and that he caused it. I know that 4 years of Oliver's life happened without him and that cannot be undone." I paused. "I also know that he has shown up every single time. And that Oliver calls him something other than Rhett now. And that I watch his face when Oliver isn't looking and it is," I stopped. "It is not the face of a man who is going through motions." Ren was quiet for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. "Then I'm watching." "I know you are," I said. "If he won't," I said. And I heard, in my own voice, the quiet certainty of something I had not admitted to myself yet in clear language. The moment that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in March. Oliver had been asking, for several weeks, a question that I had been fielding with careful deflection. Why does Rhett not stay for breakfast? The question had a logistical answer. Rhett did not stay for breakfast because I had not invited him to stay for breakfast, because the distance between showing up reliably and being given the intimacy of a morning was a significant distance and I was not ready to close it. But Oliver was for and logistical answers did not satisfy him, and he asked the question with the persistent frequency of someone who felt the shape of the answer without being able to name it. On the Tuesday evening in March, after Oliver was in bed, Rhett and I sat in my living room in the specific quiet that descended after Oliver-shaped chaos, and Rhett said, without preamble, "I need to tell you something." I looked at him. "I know what I did," he said. "The morning after. I know how I looked at you. I know what it communicated." He paused. His jaw was doing something. I had spent a very long time not letting anything matter in a particular way. It was deliberate. It was something I had decided and I was very committed to it, and you were something I had not prepared for, and instead of acknowledging that he stopped. I managed it. The way I manage things. And I have had 4 years to understand exactly what that cost. The room was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" I said. "Because Oliver asked me last week," he said, "why I didn't stay for breakfast." I closed my eyes briefly. "And I didn't have an answer," he said. And I realized that the reason I didn't have an answer was because the answer was something I had not said out loud yet. He looked at me with those gray-green eyes that were my son's eyes and were, I was understanding, also simply his, not just a feature I associated with what he had given Oliver but his own, belonging to him, the eyes of a man who was looking at me with something completely unmanaged. "I love my son," he said. He is extraordinary, Jasper, and I know I have no right to the pride I feel when I watch him, but I feel it anyway, every time." He paused. And another pause. Longer. The pause of a man arriving somewhere he has been approaching for months. "I never stopped thinking about you." After that night. That morning I told myself it was the right management of a situation, and for 4 years it was the thing I was most wrong about. The room was very quiet. "Rhett," I said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," he said. "I'm not asking for anything tonight. I needed you to know that I know. That I understand what I did. That it was not, you were never just a situation to be managed, and I treated you like one, and I have not forgiven myself for it, and I do not expect you to do it on any timeline that is not entirely yours." I looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had crouched to my son's level in a gallery. Who had learned Oliver's favorite dinosaur and his current favorite color and the specific way he liked his toast. Who arrived on time every time without exception. Who had sat on my kitchen floor building block towers with the focused commitment of someone who understood that this was the most important work he had ever been given. Who had just said "I love my son" out loud for the first time, in a voice that had nothing practiced in it at all. "Oliver asked me something a few months ago," I said. "He asked if his father would love him." Rhett went very still. "What did you tell him?" he said quietly. "I told him he was someone it would be very difficult not to love," I said. "He told me that wasn't really an answer." "He was right," Rhett said. "He usually is," I said. Silence. "The answer," Rhett said very quietly, "is yes. The answer to his question is yes. Completely. Without reservation or condition or, yes." I looked at him. "I know," I said. His eyes did something. "I'm not ready to tell him who you are yet," I said. "That is still mine to decide, and I will decide it when I know it is right for him." "I know," he said. "And I am not," I paused. Chose the words carefully. "I am not ready for anything to change quickly. What has been built here has been built slowly and carefully, and that is the only way I know how to trust anything anymore." "I know," he said. "Jasper. I know. I'm here. Whatever pace is right. Whatever terms are yours. I'm not going anywhere." I looked at him for a long moment. "Stay for breakfast," I said. He went very still. "On Saturday," I said. "Stay for breakfast. Oliver will be very pleased about the toast logistics." Something happened on Rhett Calloway's face that I had been watching happen in pieces for months and was now, finally, all in one place at once. The full version of the thing underneath the control, unmistakable and enormous, and looking at me with the kind of certainty that does not require a word to communicate. "Okay," he said. Very quietly. "Okay," I said. Saturday came. Rhett stayed for breakfast. Oliver, who had been asking about this for weeks, received the news with the satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis had been confirmed and who was too gracious to say "I told you so," though his expression communicated it clearly. He sat between us at the kitchen table and ate his toast with the toast logistics arranged exactly as required and talked about dinosaurs and his painting and the duck he had seen in the park who he had named Gerald and whether Gerald had a family. Rhett said he thought Gerald probably had an extensive family and was well respected in the duck community. Oliver said that made sense because Gerald had very confident energy. I looked at the two of them across my kitchen table, at the gray-green eyes that matched, at the similar line of their brows when they were thinking, at the complete ease of my son with this man who had spent months earning every millimeter of it, and I felt something that I had been keeping behind glass for a long time begin, very carefully, to exist outside of it. Not all at once. Not without the weight of what it cost to get here. But present. Possible in a way that I was allowing myself, for the first time, to look at directly. After breakfast Oliver went to get his drawing supplies and Rhett stood at my kitchen sink washing up, without being asked, simply doing it, the way he had begun simply doing things over months of Saturdays, and I stood beside him and said, very quietly. He asked if you would love him. Rhett was still. You should tell him yourself, I said. Someday. When it's time. He deserves to hear the answer from you. Rhett turned off the tap. He turned to look at me. His eyes were doing the thing. The unmanaged, uncontrolled, completely present thing, and he said, very quietly, thank you. Don't thank me, I said. Just keep showing up. I will, he said. Simply. Completely. Like a promise made by someone who understood what promises cost and was willing to pay. Oliver came back with his drawing supplies and climbed into his chair and began drawing Gerald the duck with great concentration. Outside the window the city did its Saturday thing. Inside my kitchen the answer to my son's question existed at last, not in the abstract, not in a careful deflection, not in something it would be very difficult not to, but in the specific and real and present form of a man washing breakfast dishes at my sink and staying. Actually, completely, finally staying. And my son, who had asked the question that had no clean answer, drew his duck and did not know yet that the answer had arrived. But it had. It was here. And I was allowing myself to believe, going to keep being here. 6 months later. Oliver decided on a Sunday morning. No announcement. No ceremony. He simply looked at Rhett across the breakfast table and said, "Can I call you Dad?" Rhett put down his coffee cup. He was quiet for long enough that Oliver's face began to shift toward the particular expression of a child recalibrating. Then Rhett said, "Yes." Just that. Just yes. Oliver nodded with the satisfied expression of someone who had made a good decision and knew it. Then he went back to his toast. I looked at Rhett. Rhett looked at me. His eyes were very bright. He picked up his coffee cup. And outside the window the city went about its ordinary Sunday business completely unaware that inside a small warm kitchen something that had been broken for a long time had just, quietly, finished becoming whole.